There's a beautiful Māori saying that says, if you want to have hope and faith in the future, you must first stand on the shoulders of the past. Really interesting. I talk to a lot of surfers, right? And 99.9% of us are amateur surfers. And I say, what do you do for your mental health? Oh, no, I go surfing. Oh, when was the last time you surfed? Oh, 2 weeks ago. And I haven't had a surf for 3 weeks. So if surfing was my mental health go-to, I'm in trouble, man, right? So you need to build other things in your day. If surfing is what you do, but you're only getting out once a week, that's not enough anymore. You've got to have 2 or 3 things in your day that's going to, switch that brain off.
Welcome back to the Surf Mastery podcast. That was a couple of quotes from my very special guest in today's episode, Sir John Kirwan. John is one of the greatest rugby players of all time, having played over 60 tests for the New Zealand All Blacks. After his incredible career as a professional athlete, he went on to have a very successful coaching career within the sport of rugby. And after his coaching career, he went into the mental health space, in which he still works now. John has been a spokesperson for mental health here in New Zealand and has created a bunch of initiatives and products in that space, which we discuss in this episode. In 2012, John was knighted Sir John Kirwan for his contribution to mental health and rugby. John is also a long time and still passionate surfer. This is a wide-ranging discussion. We talk about everything from surfing to mental health to professional athleticism and coaching, parenting, plus much more. So much wisdom in this episode. Please share this to any non-surfers who you might think will get a lot out of this. I give you my conversation with Sir John Kirwan. First of all, thank you for doing this. It's awesome. I appreciate that. And then I grew up, watching you play rugby, and I've been, obviously following your journey, my own struggles with mental health and the New Zealand stigma that came with it. So, and of course, we are joined together by the art and sport of surfing, which is, I'm sure, dear to your heart as it is to mine and my listeners. What's harder, surfing or rugby?
That's a really interesting starting question. I had to give my ego away with my surfing, which was the hardest thing. So as a competitive rugby player, I would go out and I wouldn't be happy unless I surfed to a level that I wanted to. So that wasn't very good because I was coming out of the water and thinking, oh, shit, I didn't surf very well today at my standards, because I'm not a very good surfer, don't get me wrong. But sometimes I wasn't enjoying it because I was competing against myself, which was not the spiritual place I wanted to take my surfing, right? It was, I have a competitive life, business, rugby. I don't need another competition in my head. So that was probably the hardest thing. And then really the consistency of surfing as much as I did other things is always an ongoing challenge, right? So when you get to my age, if you don't stay in the water or get in the water, then things just get a whole lot harder, which then if you have that competitors in your head, you very rarely enjoy surfing, right? So to keep the stoke going, to make sure that I love it, then I've had to change a wee bit.
How did you come to terms with that? Like what changed?
You give your ego away, right? So you stop listening to your ego. And often when I'm talking to myself, they say that's the first sign of insanity, by the way, but that's all good. I have some pretty cool conversations with myself, so I'm not too worried about it. But you question why you're doing it. I really laugh at people in the water that are, just thinking they're Kelly Slater. That's what I say in my own head. They're paddling inside you, they're doing stuff, and I sort of go, well, you're getting out of this and going back to work, or you're actually a full-time surfer trying to be world's best. What's the vibe you're trying to find? So for me, it was really saying to myself, why are you doing this? At what level is acceptable? And so it really took on a way more spiritual thing for me.
So why you ask yourself that question? Why are you doing this in terms of surfing? Well, what's the answer? What do you mean by
Um,
spirituality? Like,
well, spirituality for me is being in the moment, realizing that I am way smaller than most of us think we are. So I'm just a person who is like anyone else. So what the most important things in life are living every day, being really aware of your environment. Um, so for me, it's taking in the whole environment and making sure that I'm enjoying the moment around a sea, nature, exercise, and then the feeling, the buzz, the stoke you get when you get a good wave is all part of my spirituality, right? So, when I was really unwell and I didn't really want to be around much anymore, I had to rebuild my life into boxes. You know, what sort of husband do I want to be? What sort of father do I want to be? What sort of uh, purpose do I want to have in life? So, what's your job? And then, what is my spirituality? I was brought up a Catholic, and I don't believe in the Vatican. So, what is my spirituality, and how do I fill that cup, right? And I also think that it's really important to realize there is a bigger, a greater good than you. We are not that important um, in this world. So how do you live that on a daily basis?
what came first, rugby or surfing?
I made that decision probably when I was 15, 13, 14, 15. I absolutely love surfing. I had a mate of mine who's still an amazing surfer, a guy called Grant Kendall, who was always way better than me. But I just loved surfing and loved the feeling. And I was starting to look at surfing from a high performance point of view. So how do you do better cutbacks? How do you do layback cutbacks? How do you get tubed all the time? And it probably wasn't a reality. I probably wasn't that good, but in my head I was. And then I was starting to get opportunities playing rugby. So they were sort of my two sports, and I played every sport. I was a typical Kiwi kid, and so you got to make a decision what you're going to commit to, right? And if you commit to surfing, the chances are probably a lot smaller of you making it. It's probably a better lifestyle choice than rugby, So, but probably not a good financial decision. So for me, I was starting to make it in rugby, and I had to commit to one sport. And so, at the elite level, committing to that sport's really, really important. So, you got to commit totally. You can't. Very, very rarely do you see sort of cross code
Yeah.
athletes. There's probably Jeff Wilson was one. He managed to play when you could play when you had summer sports and winter sports. We don't have those anymore. We just have sport. So yeah, that was a decision, and probably the right one.
Is there any lessons from surfing that helped you in your rugby career?
It's a really interesting question. I think flow was probably something that I always struggled with. So if I tried too hard, then my natural ability wouldn't come out. So if I overthought things, and so I think in surfing, you get into a flow, and feeling that energy and understanding that energy would probably be the biggest lesson. Just don't overthink it.
I'm assuming that rugby was similar to surfing in a way that, I mean, in surfing, you're dealing with the unknown, right? The ocean. It can be random and unpredictable at times. And in rugby, of course, you've got the opposition. So I'm guessing that rugby was somewhat spiritual and really forced you to, this pressure of the game forced you to be present in the moment. But then as you got better and better at rugby, did it start to lose that sort of forcing you into the now? Because that's what I find with a lot of surfers. A lot of surfers come into surfing and it's very therapeutic because of that aspect. It's new, it's intense. And then as they start getting better, they get too comfortable and they start getting in their head and they lose that flow. And that, how did that happen in rugby, and how did you deal with that?
Yeah, I think every childhood dream of being a athlete in the sport that you choose is there's always a moment where it becomes your job, and all the pressures of actually the job in and around it can take your energy, and you need to have a professional approach to it, which can take the joy out of it. And I think one of the skills of playing for a long time is finding that joy, possibly in what you've always found it in, or in other things, like, the joy of winning, the joy of being the best athlete, the joy of being whatever. So for me, rugby was always way easier than surfing because I was training it every day, right? So I'm spending 3 or 4 hours a day training it. So it got easier. It got harder from a physical point of view, and from a motivational point of view, and from a sort of ability point of view. But it's easy. So you imagine right now, if I could put you into the perfect environment and you can surf 3 hours a day, right? Then you get out and you eat accordingly, and then you stretch accordingly, and then you visualize accordingly, and you plan accordingly for the next day. Then you go back and do another 3 hours. There'd be a lot of us to be a lot better. You know what I mean, at surfing. So once the game becomes your profession, then you've got to learn how you keep that enjoyment, and it's not an easy process. I see a lot of young players go through this. They've been really excited, they've played it all their lives, they've been really good at it, and then they get their first pro contract, and the first year is all awesome. Then the second year, well, this is getting harder, and it continues to be a real discipline to stay at the top for a long time. That's why the average lifespan of a professional sportsman at rugby is probably 4 to 5 years. I don't know what it's in surfing.
I think Kelly Slater's destroying all of that stuff at the moment, isn't he? He's still doing it at a high level.
He was probably the first of the transitional athletes in surfing, diet, all those sort of training things. He was probably the first. And we're seeing a lot of athletes, LeBron James is 38. You're seeing a lot more athletes playing till their 40s. So, if you look after yourself, keep the enjoyment, keep the body right, keep the diet right. It's a pretty disciplined life, though. You know what I mean? It's pretty tough.
Oh, yeah. You mentioned the youth, which leads us into coaching. And you were a professional rugby player, and that's a rare thing in itself. But it's even more rare to see that level of athlete transition into coaching. What separates, those two things? Like, what did you learn from that transition?
I think my transition was a little bit forced on me because I didn't know what I was going to do. Like, I'm a butcher by trade. I got to 35 and you think I'm going to go back to butchering, unskilled, never passed an exam in my life. So, what else do I have? Whoa. Because the hard thing for athletes is, and this is really important. I think the world is heading down a wrong pathway from a high performance sport and what success is, right? So we think success is the Kelly Slaters or, maybe the top 10, but that's not true. So what happens with a lot of athletes is they commit themselves to their sport, and in a lot of sports, it's over by the time you're 30, 31, 32, right? But you don't have any other skills, but you are the best in the world, right? So you think about the top 100 surfers, right? How many of them would be paid enough to survive? Probably 20. And the other 80 are probably pretty damn good surfers, but they're going to have to find something else to supplement, right? With rugby, that pool's probably bigger. So you're probably looking at 360 professional sports people in New Zealand from a rugby playing point of view. But the hardest thing is that not a lot of them are going to earn enough to never work again. And you're going to have to commit yourself to your sport. So I wasn't dissimilar, right? And so I get to 35, and what am I good at? And I always wanted to be world's best at whatever I did. So if you look at your career, when you hang up your boots, what are your options to be world best? You always have to start again, and that's always hard. So you have to go back to being apprentice when all your peers have been 15 years into a job. They're either established in their life or whatever. They're doing what they've chosen, whereas you've got to start again, and that's really hard. So that put me into coaching. But then the first thing someone said to me was, if you're going to coach, what's your philosophy? Why do you want to do this, right? And my philosophy was always to give the player the opportunity to grow like I did from a technical, tactical, and mental point of view. So my coaching philosophy was to give everyone an opportunity to be better. And once I started concentrating on that, I really, really enjoyed seeing guys grow and, really take opportunities. And, and some of them didn't get it. So some of them would just think that was about being a rugby player. But I was telling this story yesterday. So, I'm a butcher for Mangere. I played probably my third game for Auckland. And I'm in the aftermatch function. And Andy Hayden says to me, may he rest in peace. And he says, JK, you're going to talk to that guy over there. I said, what do you mean? He said, you go and talk to that guy over there. I said, mate, I'm not going to talk to that guy over there. I'm not going to talk to that guy over there. It was Prime Minister Muldoon, right? And he said, well, if you don't, you're not playing with you. And I said, piss off, mate. Like, you're the captain. You don't decide who plays next week. So he called John Harder, the coach, over, and he said to Hardy, if JK doesn't go and talk to the Prime Minister, he's not playing next week. That's right, eh, Hardy? And Hardy goes, yeah, that's right. So I go and talk to the Prime Minister. I am dying, man. I'm dying inside. I do not want to go over and talk to the Prime Minister. And the Prime Minister was really good. Oh, hey, JK, I followed your last 3 games. You're doing really well. So he put me at ease. But I remember coming back down, just chatting to Andy Hayden, and he said, rugby is an opportunity for you to meet amazing people, JK, and you don't know who in this room might help you, right? So I just got into the habit of just going over, and he said also ask people questions. People love talking about themselves. So, I would go and mix and mingle with people, right? And so I also thought that was a part. Rugby has always been a springboard to life, to opportunity, to meeting people. And that's not just about being a great rugby player. Like, that's actually the easy part. The hard part is improving yourself as a human, connecting with other people, finding out all sorts of different things, and then looking for different opportunities. So, and some of the people I'd coach would not get that. So they just thought it was just about the game and being the best rugby player they could be. And others would. And they take opportunities and look at it differently and really grow. Most of those have gone into coaching or management or gone on to do businesses.
So we're kind of on the subject of mentors and icons with, and then there's that holistic aspect as well. Because you as a coach, if you have to choose between 2 equally talented players on the field, you're more likely to choose the one who's actually pretty good at managing his emotions and good with, as a team player and good with relationships.
It comes down, actually, you got to be really, really careful because, I think the managing emotions and controlling what's happening on the field for sure. But I've selected better rugby players for the moment than someone who is not as good a rugby player, but way more balanced, You've also got to balance that with winning. Yeah. So you cannot coach if you don't win. So you've got to balance that up, and you've got to create an opportunity for people to grow, but you're still coaching and trying to win a football game, right? So you've got to be careful you don't mix those 2 up, because otherwise you'll the key ingredient here is the vehicle, which is rugby, right? And rugby is the most important vehicle, and then you build an environment where people can grow and get better, but that's their choice, not yours. Your job is to pick rugby players to win. Now, someone like me has a philosophy that better people make better rugby players, and it's our responsibility as a game to show that pathway. But around, normally those that can cope with pressure off the field will perform better on it. So then it becomes a whole. But you got to be careful you don't put that first.
Okay. And then, so Andy Hayden was obviously a mentor and an icon for you growing up within the game and probably outside off the field as well. Is there anyone else? Is there anyone else who fits that mold, and how have they influenced you as a whole?
So early in your career, you get older people telling you to get a mentor and, get someone to bounce off. And I think that's incredibly good advice. But once I put my life into boxes, right? So if you think about those boxes that I spoke about before, husband, partner, father, work, spiritually, then what I tried to do was put people into those boxes, you know. So I think I was really, really fortunate. So probably husband and father, my dad, was really, really influential, and even my father-in-law, the way that he was as a father, and so I looked at those people and thought, how do I want to be as a person and as a father and as a husband? And then obviously the relationship things and another discussion. Then I think, from a work point of view, John Hart was very influential in my early career as a rugby coach. He was very, very influential. I had, I had Andy Hayden, some of the elders. There's a beautiful Māori saying that says, if you want to have hope and faith in the future, you must first stand on the shoulders of the past. And I think rugby is really, really important in that structure, that like the elders need to take their responsibility seriously, but also need to lean in and help and teach. So I was really fortunate when we had strong backseat leadership, and I'm pretty sure it's still the same in rugby. So around rugby, that was really good. There was also a guy called Andrea Bonomo. He was a Frenchman. He coached me in Italy, and he brought the art and philosophy side to rugby for me. So being more of an artist and a painter, and your canvas is the rugby field, right? So he was really good for me from a rugby spirituality point of view. So that was really cool. And then, I've had a few people come into my life and help me around the business side of things. So, at the moment, my co-founder's been amazing for me. I've been on this really crazy journey in a startup business for 5 years. And a guy called Kevin Roberts before that was a CEO of Lion Nathan, then Saatchi & Saatchi's. I'd always bounce ideas off him, and he'd always give me really good business advice. So, that was in that, and then in the spirituality stuff, it was really a lot of actually reading and trying to understand spirituality and what that is. It's such a big word, and trying to personalize what that is for me. So yeah, once I sorted those mentors out in those boxes, it was pretty easy to go to those people for the right reasons.
And that's such a wise way to approach it, to have different mentors in different aspects of life. And that truly does allow you to stick to that Māori saying of standing on the shoulders of giants or ancestors, etc. What about in terms of like your personal psychology and your own mental health? Was there any standout mentors in that regards?
Oh, I think the woman that probably saved my life and changed my life was probably the most important thing. When I was incredibly unwell with my mental health, I had to go and see a psychiatrist. And for me, the learning around, so going from surviving to thriving, learning a daily mental health plan, learning tools and techniques to keep myself incredibly well mentally. And her name was Dr. Louise Armstrong. And so, she was probably just doing her job, but for me, doing her job, for me, she was world class and world changing. So it changed my philosophy, and she understood me and gave me the right tools to approach it properly. So, and that completely changed my life. So I have a really solid daily mental health plan. I follow the 6 pillars, which at the time I didn't know I was building, right? I didn't understand what I was really doing. I was just trying to get well. And I think, people say, well, why is your mental health so important? And I sort of go, well, I'm a better husband, I'm a better father, I'm a better workmate, I'm a better friend. So it's pretty important to put first, you know what I mean? So for me, those things were really important from a mental health point of view, and they still keep me in really good stead at the moment, which is really cool.
So can you describe some of those tools?
Yes, so the 6 pillars are move, chill, enjoy, connect, which I think is a really important one, celebrate and do. So I do those things every single day, and they're just really practical things. For example, a do is, how are you always growing mentally and challenging and doing something new? And at the moment, it's learning to read music and play the guitar, right? Which I'm shit at, but It's something that takes me out of this world that I'm in, and lose myself. I also have a monkey brain, so some things that are really important to understand when you're talking about your mental health is, how does your mind work, right? So I've got a ruminating mind, so my mind never stops. And part of the issue with the ruminating mind is you can't sit still, right? And so for me, I'm an active relaxer. So for example, I just call my ruminating mind Bob the monkey, right? And I need to put Bob the monkey in his cage, and he needs to have a banana. Surfing does that.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, surfing's two birds with one stone. So that's the move as well, right? So I get to move and be physical and switch off my brain and connect with nature. So there's probably three birds with one stone, actually. So I think for me, playing the guitar is a do, but also switches off my brain. Reading is also another thing that really relaxes my mind, and cooking's also two birds with one stone, because also my wife loves me cooking. So there are other things, but for example, having a shower and feeling the water is really important. Having a cup of coffee and not taking my cell phone as a date, because it's a shit date. It's a shit date when you're having a cup of coffee, because before you know it, you finished your coffee, you haven't tasted it. So sometimes I take my phone on my coffee date when I might be working and stuff and I need to do shit, but normally I don't take it on my coffee date. So, for example, today, I've got up, I had a shower, beautiful shower, felt the water, really started my day well. Went downstairs, had a coffee, and then read the news. So I do read the news on my phone, because you don't get a newspaper anymore. But I love that, because also part of my mental health is I've got a dumb shark, right? So because I never passed an exam, and so I have a dumb shark. So I love reading and improving my knowledge. So I do that, So already I've got two of my things in the bank, right? Later today, I'll probably find some time to play an hour guitar. I'll read before I go to sleep. I do a lot of breathing. So all of a sudden, I just integrate those things into my day.
I think a lot of people get caught up in, they think mental health or their own psychology is a thinking process, and they read books, they get into talk therapy. And of course, that can be an important part of it. But what you're iterating here, and what I think needs to really get through to people, is doing the work is about doing it. It's a doing thing. Literally sit down and play the guitar. That's so important that people make that transition. It's having the knowledge of looking after your mental health is not enough. You've actually got to do the things that you learn, and it's a doing thing, and that's what allows us to get out of our heads, essentially.
Yeah, look, I think I totally agree. So here at Groove, we talk about do one thing today. You need to build your plan, and you need to try stuff. I totally agree with reading all the books you like. Read all the books. I read a lot of books about well-being, and I try shit, right? But I don't think it should or will work. And if it does work, it stays within my plan, right? So I think understanding how your mind works, and then understanding what keeps your energy levels up. So we've got no more brain capacity, man. Is your inbox ever empty? People don't have work-life balance anymore. There's just life. So we need to be more active in actually switching off our brains and doing things that are going to keep our energy up. So, once upon a time, I talk about my dad. My dad drove home from work every single night. Nothing followed him home. He'd listen to 1ZB on the way home. He'd get home and have dinner, fall asleep in front of the TV, and get up the next day and do it all. And nothing followed him on the weekend. Now people are catching up on emails, or they sit down to have a cup of coffee, and they're looking at social media or whatever. And I'm cool with that. I don't give a toss what you do. But you got to give the brain a break, right? And that break needs to come around whatever suits you. Might be puzzles, might be knitting, might be, really interesting. I talk to a lot of surfers, right? And 99.9% of us are amateur surfers. And I say, what do you do for your mental health? Oh, no, I go surfing. Oh, when was the last time you surfed? Oh, 2 weeks ago, And I haven't had a surf. I went to the beach last weekend, didn't get a surf, and I haven't had a surf for 3 weeks. So if surfing was my mental health go-to, I'm in trouble, man. Right?
Yeah.
So you need to build other things in your day. For example, my move pillar, when I'm training now, I'm trying to train for my pop-up and trying to train for surfing. but it's still my movement. I'm doing more training for surfing than I am surfing, right? So you got to be really careful that you just don't have a one thing in your bucket. If surfing is what you do, but you're only getting out once a week, that's not enough anymore. You got to have 2 or 3 things in your day that's going to, switch that brain off.
Yeah, that's good advice for the surfers out there, because often it is for surfers, it is surfing. And yeah, we just don't get to go every day often. So you've got to have something that you do daily. That's great advice. Yeah.
Yeah, and look, mate, it can be down that, I brought a wobble board that helps my balance, so, and that's a bit of fun, so you can also put things in the day so that next time you do go surfing, at least you've done some work towards it. But for me, I absolutely love surfing, but I also love playing the guitar now, right? I also love lying there and reading a book, so that's pretty cool. I prefer to go surfing, but hey, we live in New Zealand, man. Like been on shores for 10 days.
Yep, I get that. So within the mental health space, as you know, young boys and young men are suffering a lot. And I think what goes hand in hand with that maybe is often the misinformation and sometimes the bad rhetoric that goes around the word masculinity. And I'm wondering, I've heard you speak on that topic before. I'm wondering if you could speak to that word masculinity a little bit and help us sort of to accept and modernize it a little bit.
So I think you need to add masculinity and stereotyping. So I think it's getting better, but I probably grew up in a rugby, racing and beer environment, like not my dad's fault, he's an amazing father, but we never hugged or kissed. We just shook hands, There was no emotion, right? And there's 2 really, really important emotions that a male needs to have. One is to cry, and the other one is to have anger, but know what to do with it. So if you keep suppressing your anger, it's going to be as bad as suppressing your tears, right? So a lot of us grew up lacking 2 really important emotions that we didn't know what to do with. So, I think the most important thing is vulnerability. And we got brought up that to be vulnerable is weakness, but it's actually a superpower, right? And so you grow up with a perception, and that's why sports people, musicians, politicians, people in leadership roles need to be living and owning this space, right? Because I think the perception of what a male is bullshit, right? We don't actually have a real positive role model around some of those emotions publicly, and I think for us, masculinity is what, I used to say to my kids, as males, if you fall over, you need to try and be tough, but if your soul's hurting, cry, man. That was the best way that I could try and explain it. And I think, when kids are growing up, it's okay to be angry, it's not don't show anger, which is probably how a lot of us got brought up. It's actually you're angry, go and do something positive with it. Or why are you angry? Try and work out those emotions and get that anger out straight away in a positive way. And then, you can move on from that anger instead of putting it down like this. And then you go to a pub on a Friday night, and after the 4th beer, you can feel the tension, right? New Zealand pubs aren't nice places to be sometimes because you can feel that male tension coming up, you know what I'm saying?
Yep. Yeah, it's a lot that needs to change, and it is changing. And it's awesome that you're helping to lead that way. Like all that stuff you just said it's easier said than done, though.
Yeah, and I have a saying: if it's meant to be, it's up to me. You want to change the environment, bro? No one's going to change it for you. You got to do it, right? You want to change the mental health of men, you got to change it, man. You got to do it in your own home with yourself, because I think society is getting us to look outside for the solutions, right? But that creates a shitload of stress. So in the near future, how do you think we're going on our ocean cleanup and plastics?
Yeah, not so great.
Yeah, right. So I can sit there and stress about that, and I can throw some rocks from other people, or I can stop buying plastics and I can start picking up plastics when I'm walking around the place, or I can start doing stuff that I can control. Does 2 things. If we all did that, the world would change, right? including the CEOs of some of these big polluting companies. And secondly, I can control my stress. Now when it rains, man, you know what I think about?
Tell me.
Global warming. Didn't think about that 5 years ago. It was just raining, man. You know what I'm saying? And that sometimes can lead to you worrying about, oh shit, your future and future of our kids and all that sort of stuff. But the only way I can change it is actually by changing me. So, if it's meant to be, it's up to me. And I just challenge every male to just be looking into those things and seeing where they can get better and how we can help our youth by living examples. You spoke about mentors and leadership a little while ago. I need to live those things for the next generation rather than talk about them.
You mentioned the word vulnerability, and I think for a lot of men that sort of is a cringe factor, and often it's perceived as vulnerability. Well, I'm not gonna cry in front of the missus.
That's what your missus want. So, get over yourselves, fellas. Right? If you think toughness around this space is got anything to do with being a great partner or a great friend, wrong pathway, brother. Because your wife or partner actually wants you to cry and actually wants you to be vulnerable. That's called love, bro. That's called complete and openness and giving yourself to a person. And I think males worry about the trust bit, right? So, oh shit, what will she or he or them think of me? And what if they go and tell someone else? We've got to get over that shit as well, right? That's really quickly you'll know who your friends are. And if someone betrays your trust, they're not your friend and you move on pretty quick rather than wait to a crisis and then you find out that they're not really your friend.
Yeah.
So, we just need to move on really quick. Life's moving really fast. We don't have time for any of us to be thinking, oh, is this the right or wrong thing to do? Vulnerability is the only thing that males need to do better right now, today. And if you don't believe me, anyone who's listening, go and ask your wife or your partner or your kid. They'll tell you.
If you could go back and give your 25-year-old self one piece of advice, what would it be?
Learn about mental health so that you don't want to jump out of a window.
What would that learning platform look like? Would it be a book?
I don't know. They weren't around back in my day, so some of the things I'm trying to do with my life now is get those things out there. I have a foundation called Mighty. We have a curriculum in primary schools to educate our tamariki around mental health. But yeah, I think if I had a better understanding of it, I think if I had the tools that I've got today, my 25-year-old self would have been having so much more fun.
Yeah. Tell us about Groove. Groove Now.
Both Mighty and Groove were created out of failure, basically. So I woke up 5 years ago and I'd failed. I've been the face of mental health in our country for 15 years, man. And 11 years ago, 12 years ago, together with the government, we created depression.org.nz, which was a first ever online self-help tool. And it won awards all around the world. But I woke up 5 years ago. What happened was government continued to spend money on the advertising, but not on the tech. So we didn't spend money on the tech. And obviously I gave my image to the government for nothing and happy to do so and continue to do so if they need it. So I woke up 5 years ago and looked at our suicide rate. It was going the wrong way. I also, on the same piece of paper, there was, we are going to put mental health into the legislation. So it's like physical health and safety. There's now mental health and safety, right? So failure doesn't really scare me. And I looked at myself and said, well, what do I need to do differently? If we keep looking at the same problem with the same head, then we're going to continue to have the same problems. So for me, it was really simple. My reference to mental health was One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, right? So I thought if I reached out, I was going to get locked up. Jack Nicholson and Chief, the big American guy. So raised $250,000 and facilitated for 1 year psychiatrists, psychologists, teachers, headmasters. And what we came up with was that four things, really. We need a mental health curriculum that's like English, maths, and science. So then I raised another $250,000 and commissioned the Auckland University. I should say we, because it's not just me. We raised $250,000 and got a curriculum built. Secondly, don't put any pressure on the schools, primary schools. So we have teachers that go into those schools and upskill the school around the curriculum. The third thing is must be co-designed. So what might work in Mangere is not going to work in Gisborne, not going to work in Invercargill. So make sure you co-design this. And then the fourth thing, which is probably an aside, but really important, that needs to start in primary school because it's too late by the time they get to secondary school. Mm-hmm. That was one thing. And then the second thing was, I believe if the world's going to change around the environment, around mental health, business is going to do it. I think government's not their fault. Full of a lot of really cool people, but they're just moving too slow, and they get too caught up in bureaucracy to actually move as fast as the world needs us right now. So what would depression.org look like on steroids, man? What would it look like if we had to spend the same amount of money on tech? And so I was really lucky. I met my co-founder, and our goal is to reach 100 million people and save 100,000 lives. We've created a SaaS product that goes into the workplace that empowers the individual to look after their own mental health, lifts the leaders about how to discuss and talk about this stuff, and then optimize the environment. So that's for profit. And we think that if you do that in your business, then your people will work better, be more productive. And so they're the two things that occupy most of my life.
Awesome. So that's the Groove app, right?
Yeah, the Groove app. So I mean, obviously you've got to be in primary schools to get mighty, but yeah, you can download the Groove app. It's still free here in our country, but we also have a workplace product. So we have a SaaS product for the workplace that if your workplace wants to implement, for me, it's preventative. So we don't want to push any more people off the cliff. So what we teach people is how you just put this on the agenda, how you talk about it, how you look after yourself around the 6 pillars, and they'll be all different for everybody, right? And then how a leader can, because we don't want the leaders to be the psychiatrist or the psychologist. We just want them to lead it, right? And so we also do a lot of sort of leadership stuff around how you can build a psychological safety work environment. And psychological safety, for me, is pretty simple. It's just trust and care and what that looks like. And the other thing that's really, really important to realize is we've got to do our jobs too, like it's really, really important for people that you feel proud about the job that you're doing. And so for me, a really good and important part of my mental health is working well. I like to be working. I like to be achieving my work goals. I like to be busy. And those things are really, really important. And so we talk about performance care. How do you get performance and care and mold those two together?
Well, from the corporate perspective, I mean, you probably know McKinsey did that massive study. And when you're in flow, you're so much more efficient. And in order to get into the flow state, you have to be looking after your mental health. Simple as that. And I had a good look through the Groove app, and I commend you on what you've done. It's incredible. I was blessed enough to, I took up marriage counseling and therapy a long time ago, and I lived in LA, and there's a different culture there. It's if you don't have a therapist in LA, you're strange. So all of those tools I learned through, one-on-one with a therapist, and now going through the Groove app and your stuff, it's all the same tools that are there, and it's accessible to anyone here. So that's awesome.
Yeah, look, and I think like you said, the most important thing is just get the information, but just try things, try things, put things in your day that are actually for your mental health. That we do so much more. I always laugh about, should we be a vegan? Should we be you get all this stuff pushed at you, sort of, you don't know what the next diet's going to be. So there's all these things around, and I don't care what you eat, man, that's your life, you know what I'm saying? But is it Julio, Pulio, or bloody vegan or vegetarian, or, you get all this information pushed to you about your diet, right? And that's cool. I mean, I love all that stuff. But in the end, you just get confused and have a glass of wine and a packet of chips. You know what I'm saying? But I'm joking. But the reality is that we need to do the same for our mental health. Everyone needs to investigate and have a look into how you're going to be your best mental self, right? And so for me, going into the Groove app, learning about stuff, there'll be stuff in there about vulnerability if you want to have a conversation. There's some tools you can use in there. And it's really just the start of people just building that daily mental health plan,
Yeah, no, I encourage people to download it. And is it available internationally?
It will be very shortly. Yeah, it's available in Australia, but it will be available internationally. Yeah, we'll got some big stuff coming up. So hopefully by August, a lot more people will be able to get it.
Oh, awesome. Yeah, we've got a lot of listeners in California. So keep your eye out for that
Oh,
one.
hey, everybody. Wow. I've
Yeah.
never surfed California. I've been there a couple of times, but probably not enough.
Oh, yeah.
Those crowds sort of scare me a wee bit. Every time I see some of those beaches, it's like, woo, man.
Yep. It's
Real
not as,
past waves though.
oh yeah, I mean the swell there is so consistent, and it's actually not too hard to beat the crowds. You drive around the corner to an unknown break. It's almost like the California coast. Almost every aspect of the coastline is surfable. It's not like New Zealand where it's you've got this rugged corners and everything. It's just there's so many places to surf in California. It is paradise in a way.
I'd love to go, man. I'd love to go surfing over there. I must do that bucket list stuff.
Yeah. Oh, it's a must. The water's warm. It's always sunny.
Did you live there?
Yeah, I was living in Malibu for about 4 years.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay, cool.
Yeah, no, it's a beautiful part of the world. Yeah, the crowds are there, but like I said, it's easy to escape, and it's certainly not as there's crowds here too. What's that?
You only need one wave. That's what I would say to my son.
Yeah.
The good thing about surfing is you only need one good wave.
Yeah. Does your son surf?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, my son, my little one. Well, he's not that little anymore. He's 23. He's still surfing because he lives here. My second son's a professional football player, so he hasn't surfed because he lives in Italy. So he hasn't surfed probably for about 5 or 6 years now. But yeah, my little one's still surfing. Yeah.
Oh, cool. And there's a lot of surfers listening that are fathers and mothers that they really want their kids to surf. And I've seen it go. I've seen parents pressure their kids too much, and it lights up the contrarian part of the kid's brain, and they don't want to surf for that reason. Any advice to those parents on how to foster that love for the ocean or guide it?
Yeah, I think I always remember that if you watch your kids grow up, especially around water, they have a natural fear, and sometimes you need to hold their hand and go past that fear. Sometimes they'll do it themselves and they might get knocked over. It's really interesting. You watch a kid will go into their ankle, go into their knees, go a bit deeper. The rare ones get out there and want to do it straight away, but most people, it's a gradual thing, and I don't think you can push that, or you need to help those moments through. I think sometimes the stoke that we get, right, and the reason why we want our kids to surf is for that stoke, but the stoke might be different for everybody. So often I talk about the emotions that they're having, not what you want them to have. So for example, how good did you feel? Do you feel a bit tired after swimming? Because that's the best bit of air in the world, right? And often you go to the beach, and why do you have a really good sleep in the afternoon? Because you've just had the best oxygen intake ever, So I think that if you encourage people around how you're feeling, but every child will come to what they want, and I think you got to be careful of the high performance stuff. If you watch a lot, and I was watching a program the other day actually about surfing. It's on Netflix or bloody Apple TV on the Final Cut or something like that. And what is interesting is the relationships of the adults around the parents that push their kids. Now they might be successful, but it's really clunky, and they have to make peace at some time. So I was a professional athlete, and I took the philosophy that sport is the most amazing thing you can have in your life for the whole of your life. Some sports you can't do for life, others you can, right? But I think it's a really fundamental part of your life. It creates friends, it creates environments that you go into that are really, really special. So I think, sport people need to do, but my kids, none of them play rugby. My daughter was a volleyballer, my middle son's a soccer player, and my little one is a rower. And so you go, well, as long as they have sport in their life, it might not be the sport that you want, but it's really, really important. A lot of parents talk about resilience and stuff. Sport's the greatest teacher of resilience, and you think about this. What is your surf limit from a size point of view?
Me? Oh, yeah, triple overhead.
Yeah, right. Well,
Yeah.
I would never go out and triple overhead. I'm a 4 to 6 foot at the most, and getting less and less now that I'm not surfing as much, because you go out and 6 foot surf, man, you can't be pissing around with that. You go out and triple overhead, that's a different world, right?
Oh,
and
yeah.
Kids are no different, So in triple overhead, I bet you some of those crowds thin out. You know what I mean? Because every surfer has his comfortable zone. And kids are no different. And if you push them past that zone, sometimes they'll thank you for it. Sometimes they'll hate you for it.
Yep.
Right. So as parents, you've got to be really aware that it's a tough one. Parenting's not easy.
No, it certainly isn't. But no, that's
you
good
get it
advice.
right.
Yeah, well, that's part of the journey.
Yeah.
But I think
a child only love.
Yeah, well, talking about how they feel and fostering what they want, that's great advice. And keep it simple.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You'll know if they're into it. My son, middle son, never ever picked up a rugby ball. He had a soccer ball at his feet at the age of.
Yeah. Yeah. I've got 3 boys and they're all soccer mad. And
that's cool.
Yeah, and in terms of they all surf as well. They're not so into surfing, but I was always just make sure that they enjoy the beach environment, and then they saw me surf, and then they naturally just found it themselves. So
yeah, look, I think also I'm anti high performance at a young age. I think a kid should play everything. I was really lucky. Played tennis, played cricket, played softball, played rugby, surfed. Swam, and then you can choose later on, right? A child will naturally go to where he wants to be his best. So you give them all those opportunities, they might end up being a polo player or whatever. But if you don't give them the opportunity to swim or all those things, then they don't. So wide range of sports, I think, is great for kids. If they want to try different stuff, go for it. To be the best in the world will take a special dedication to the sport, and you've got to have a love for it, I reckon, to come through the other end.
Yeah, and it's actually true. Like the science proves that too. You shouldn't specialize until you're in your late teens. The sports gene book, that's all in that book. So yeah. John, thank you so much for your time. I respect your time there. It's just coming up to the hour now, but I will put links to all of the stuff that you mentioned that you're in the show notes. All right, thanks, John.
Okay, take it easy.
See ya.
Bye.
Thank you so much for tuning into the show. Please share this episode with a friend or two. And if you have time, it'd be great if you could give us a rating and a review on the app that you're using. If you're interested in learning more about mental health, and more specifically your own personal mental health and how to apply it to your life, that's what I'm doing, online life coaching. You can learn more about that and book in at surfmastery.com. The next episode will be with a surfing photographer. So stay tuned and keep surfing.